throughout COVID, we did a really good job of just keeping our food ministries going strong. We didn't have quite as much success with our ministries for immigrants and refugees. Before COVID, we partnered with the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, or we call it IMIrJ, and we're really happy to have with us today Alyssa Walker Keller, and she represents IMIrJ. She is the coordinator for asylum seekers support, right? Yeah, good. So thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Can you all hear me? I am known to mumble at times. So if at any point you don't hear me, just let me know. So I'm so glad to see all of you on a Sunday morning. That's a big accomplishment to pop on Zoom. So thanks for being here. And I'm going to take us through a quick agenda of what I'm thinking, hoping that we will accomplish today, where we'll just do quick intros and a grounding just to kind of get ourselves here this morning. We'll talk about IMIrJ a little bit, about kind of our historical presence, and also the work that we've been doing more recently. We'll go over asylum seekers as a 101 kind of level of who we are here discussing. And then we'll have the time for one-to-ones. And I think part of that might seem like a strange thing to put into a training, but I actually think that it's the most critical part, because that's where we find our own selves in the story and start including ourselves in the narrative of why it's important to care for our neighbors who are asylum seekers. And then we'll talk about some possible next steps that you all can discuss amongst yourselves and get back in touch with us about. So I like to know who's in the room with me, and I know that we don't have a whole lot of time, but if we can maybe just go around and say our names. I really appreciate that, just so that I know who I'm here in the room with today. So again, Alyssa, I use she, her pronouns, and I actually do wear two hats. I work for both IMIrJ as a contractor for the Asylum Seeker Support Program, which is a baby-sized program. And then I also work for the Levin Land and Housing Coalition as the lead organizer in East Multnomah County. Do you want to go next?
I'm having trouble standing up.
Oh, that's okay.
I had knee surgery. So, Janet, and if you need to know my background or anything like that, okay.
If you want to, whatever you
I'm
want to.
retired, a family lawyer, gone to Trinity all my life. I'm interested in the legal aspects of asylum seekers and refugees, or so if you anything about the law, I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Jen, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a educator, spent 23 years working with students who were second language, third language learners for English, and a lot of students from many places in the world coming here.
I'm James. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm visiting from St. John's Cathedral in Los Angeles and recently relocated to Newburgh, Oregon. So I attend First Presbyterian in Newburgh. And I previously worked with Program for Torture Victims in Los Angeles.
My name's Mike. Originally from New York State, moved to Oregon. Right now I'm a street roots vendor. Thank you.
Go ahead. Okay, I'm Janet, and I've been a member of Trinity for 4 years. We moved here from Seattle, and I'm a retired pediatric nurse, and I'm grateful to have found Trinity.
My name's Kimberly. I'm an immigrant from Texas, and I've been in Trinity for a good long while.
My name's John. I've been here a long time as well. I'm a social worker, mostly clinical, semi-retired.
My name is Christine, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm just happy to be here to learn about this.
My name's Allison, and I'm a retired physician, and I don't know what to call myself.
Coordinator of our immigrant team, our refugee team.
So new to that role.
New to that role, right?
And I also help in the kitchen.
I say the food outreach too, right?
Yeah.
I didn't catch your name in the back.
I'm Nathan. I work here.
And folks online, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. We're a little bit
Are you muted?
My name is Bob Kraft. I've been at Trinity a little less than a year. We moved from Los Angeles, where for 49 years, I was part of All Saints Beverly Hills. We have a very active ministry in Los Angeles, helping immigrants. And I was involved in that ministry, driving people to their doctor's appointments, meeting with immigration lawyers, all that sort of thing.
Well, my
Hello,
name is, go ahead, Elizabeth. It's hard
hello,
to
my
know.
name is Elizabeth. I been at Trinity since 2011. My pronouns are she, her, and I've been an immigrant rights activist ever since I had a nanny who got deported to back to Germany. And I've actually worked with IMIrJ, and a few years ago I went on a pilgrimage from Sheridan to Northcore, and I protested in front of the Northwest Detention Center in Washington State, and have signed petitions and gone to protest. So that's about it. And I hope that Trinity one day can be a church where people can go and stay at the church as say sanctuary. So I hope the Trinity can do that one day, a sanctuary church one day. That's all I'm going to say now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Liz Lambert, and I've been on the train at Trinity for a number of years. And right now I'm not sure just exactly what they're doing, but I've also been involved with IMIrJ. And now I stay home and pretty much take care of my husband, who needs a little bit more help these days. So thank you so much for having us on Zoom, and welcome.
My name is Kathy Turman, and I'm just interested.
Welcome, Zoom folks, and welcome all of you. So today, for our grounding, I just wanted us to take a quick moment, and we're going to pause and kind of center ourselves in our own stories too. So go ahead and feel free to close your eyes if you're comfortable. And we're just going to take a moment and think back into our own family histories. Think back, see if you can find someone in your family line. And if you don't know your family story, maybe just like imagine who this person could be that has a story of immigration. We know our families sometimes hold a lot of hard spaces, so if that's a painful place to go, then maybe find a different relative or someone who is like kin to you, and think of that person who maybe was seeking a safe place to be, and what you would have wished would have received them when they arrived here, or where they arrived. These people will come with us in our bodies, in our bones, and in our hearts. So let's just take a deep breath. And remember that as we're talking about this today, we're talking not just about other people, but we're talking about ourselves, and welcome them into this space as well. Let's hold this space in a way that would make those ancestors proud. So I'm going to share a little bit about IMIrJ with you historically. So I think Elizabeth Mintz maybe mentioned this, and I'm so thankful that she did. It was a great handoff. IMIrJ has been around for a long time, over a decade, and has done a lot of different advocacy projects. So there's kind of different, there's 3 different wings, I would say, of IMIrJ. One of them is organizing in the community, both congregations such as yourselves. The relationship you would have had in the past would have been like with our organizers who would have connected you all. And then there's also this advocacy wing that does a lot of the intentionally turning people out to big events. So if you're going to talk about ICE out of Norfolk, or if you're talking about Sheridan, that was a lot of organizing work with faith communities, responding to the needs that the immigrant community has named. And so IMIrJ has been at the front lines of this work. We helped pass the sanctuary bill that made one of the strongest sanctuary Oregon, one of the strongest sanctuary law states in the country. We got ICE out of the Washington County Courthouse after a 2-year campaign. Some of our members have marched around that courthouse every day or every week for 2 whole years until that moment happened. We were part of getting asylum seekers released from Sheridan a few years back, and we carry a long history of doing this work. More recently, we have an accompaniment team. So that's kind of where I'm going to launch into today. So IMIrJ, and this poor sad board, I apologize, really got beat up in transit. We're gonna get it so you can see. If we're talking about a horizon where everyone is welcome here in Oregon, welcome and feeling like they're at home, if that's our goal, we have a long ways to go, right? And also, we know that there's like a historical piece to it. So when the 2016 election happened, IMIrJ convened a bunch of listening groups with different impacted communities. So folks who were in the immigration rights community, folks who were working as community-based organizations, different immigrants that we knew. And one thing that kept cropping up was that people were really afraid to go to appointments they had, whether that was at the ICE detention center for check-ins or to courts like immigration court, or local county courthouses, just to do the things that are part of daily life and business. And so IMIrJ created this accompaniment program in 2018, roughly, where we started walking alongside folks to their appointments. We trained volunteers from lots of different congregations, and those folks would show up with someone and go with them into whatever legal appointment they needed to, just to be like an extra presence, not as a lawyer, not providing advice, not necessarily even as someone who spoke the language, but just a physical presence alongside someone who was in one of the most traumatic and scary moments of their lives. That program has both grown and dwindled over the years. Like, it depends on the moment. It kind of ebbs and flows with immigration. And in 2020, when COVID happened, the border shut down and in-person check-ins stopped. And so there was kind of a pause in that activity, and I would say there was much less accompaniment happening, to the point where they paused the program. I will say that one of the most exciting things of this last month is that we have reopened the program, and we trained 30 volunteers in January, and we have another training coming up in March. So if anyone's interested in learning about that, I want to make sure to share that information with you at the end. We knew in 2020 that, even in 2020, we knew, I would say, that through the accompaniment program, we started seeing we expected a certain amount of deportation defense cases to be who we were focusing on in our accompaniments. But what we started finding was that there were a lot of asylum seekers that were asking for accompaniment to the federal courthouse, which is actually not a really high risk situation. It's just usually a check-in, and maybe they would have to go to the intensive supervision program where if you had an ankle monitor, you would have to have that checked on a regular basis as well. Those aren't high potential of deportation moments, but they're terrifying if you're showing up speaking another language. And so we realized that a lot of these people were clients of Equity Corps of Oregon, who got the contract for universal representation. So when you ask about the legal piece, universal representation is something that's been in our state since around 2016 and is funded by the state. As people started showing up to these appointments with Equity Corps, it turned out there was a large number of asylum seekers that were coming through, and nobody knew anything about how many of them there were or how many cases were open in Oregon. And it took us collaborating with various partners, both Catholic charities, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and some other resettlement agencies, to discover that A, there were no services available, and B, there were no case managers available because there were no services to refer them to, and C, that nobody knew for sure how many folks were in this process, but there were at least 6,000 in Oregon, and that was based on data that the U.S. Council of Bishops at the border gave us. That's a large number of people in Oregon that are so underground that nobody actually knows that they're here. So out of that, we started building relationships with those folks. And when 2020 happened, as we were starting to talk about having an immigrant cohort, the pandemic occurred, everyone went online, and we were really concerned about what was going to happen with those folks. We ended up writing a grant to OHA for emergency rental assistance. And through that program, we were able to get 75 different folks who either were migrant or asylum seekers access to rental assistance that maybe wouldn't have known through other programs that they could apply. That also gave us a lot of information, because we had conversations with each of those folks, and it gave us a lot of data and understanding of oh, these are the priorities. The things that we kept hearing from folks were that they needed better systems. They needed someone to come alongside them and help them organize for a system that would provide access to food, to housing, and to a more sustainable way to put down roots. Because as you'll discover later, there are systems in place for some populations who are immigrants, and there are not systems in place for other populations. And it becomes really complicated if you're showing up in a place that has no system for you to receive support from. So we learned about the housing needs, and primarily a lot of the folks named that they really wanted to put down roots in a more permanent way. They wanted to make Oregon their home. And so we started having conversations with our sister organization, the Land and Housing Coalition, to think about that. And some of you may know the Land and Housing Coalition. Sarah Lose is the organizer in this part of Multnomah County. And it convenes cohorts of churches that are thinking about how to use their land in ways that could look like affordable housing, or stewarding their land in a way that makes it an accessible place for our houseless neighbors to receive resources. The third thing that we realized in all of this, and that's why we're here today, and you all are kind of actually a test for me, this is my first time doing this presentation, is that we needed to build our base of congregations who understood what it means to be an asylum seeker, and the difference between being a refugee and an undocumented person and an asylum seeker. Because if you don't know the differences, then it makes it really hard to advocate for a specific need. So these are the 3 steps we're going to kind of explore today, and this is also my role as I took on this work plan in the fall. IMIrJ is a really small organization. I want to name that. We have had usually an executive director, a couple of organizers, an office person, and the accompaniment person. And in the last year, we've had a ton of transition. Our executive director, Alyssa, left in October, and we don't have organizers right now. So that leaves me and the accompaniment person and our office person who's leaving in March. So I want to name that. Not because I don't think our work is super important, but because you will see transition. And when I tell you to go look at our webpage, it may not be updated. So kind of word of mouth right now. And also there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm very eager to have these conversations with faith communities. So we're gonna hop past this sad little page here that's so beat up and start talking about the differences between these different groups that we're talking about. And I realize this is going to be very hard to see, so I'll read it. But I think it's really important to name asylum seekers, undocumented, refugee. What's in a name and what does it mean, right? Lots of congregations are familiar with ministries to refugees. And the refugee process is one where if you show up, you have gone through a third country typically. And there's an application process that you filed with the UN's Human Council, or I want to say the Humanitarian Council on Refugees. I'm actually not sure what the age is. But you've been vetted. Basically, you've gone through tons of screenings, biometrics, paperwork, background checks. Your story has been corroborated in multiple different ways. And you may be in a camp waiting for years and years and years. A family that I'm close to that was from the Congo originally was in a camp in Uganda for 18 years before they were able to arrive here. So this is a long process. You may have escaped an acute situation. Your children may have never been in the country that you were born in, and now you're arriving to a third country. When you arrive, you qualify for a lot of different benefits because you have been through this vetting process. So you receive a work permit on arrival. You qualify for case management that's administered in Oregon by one of 6 different agencies that have contracts with the federal government. So the resettlement agencies work closely with folks, provide they're charged with finding housing for these folks on their arrival. They're charged with helping them sign up for benefits at DHS, for TANF, for food stamps. They help get the kids enrolled in school. They make sure everyone's vaccinations are up to date. And there are even some programs that kind of come alongside, like the Refugee Care Collective, that make sure that folks have somebody to walk alongside them and be their friend as well. They kind of pair communities with actual individuals who are arriving and build relationships, which of course goes a long ways to making a family feel more stable when they know that someone is going to be their friend and walk next to them. They're also able to receive ongoing support like classes and training programs. So there's workforce development programs that refugees can receive support from. There's different, welcome to the United States, like here is how to use our microwaves. Maybe you've never cooked on an electric stove because you've only used a gas stove, or maybe you've been in a camp and haven't had a stove. This is the number you call if something's happening. These are the parenting practices that might get you in trouble. These are the resources to learn about how to save your money, all kinds of different things that just to help people understand the culture of the United States so they don't inadvertently run into barriers. So the undocumented community has no path to status. They've arrived here for lots of different reasons. They may have arrived because they're fleeing violence. They may have arrived for economic reasons. They may be fleeing gang violence that's not necessarily affected them personally, but they don't want to raise their children in an unsafe situation. These are folks who pay taxes, and they have deep, deep, deep roots in our community. So the most recent census data I could find, which is not recent, was 2016, and I think that's also telling, right? That people often don't report to the census as undocumented folks because they're terrified of their information going to the federal government. And that really ends up harming that community in a backwards way because they don't end up being able to be represented. There may be like a lot of folks living in one part of the county, and if they're not represented, they won't receive services going forward. So it's a real catch-22 to be undocumented. Of those 110,000, 30% had been here 20 plus years and had been undocumented that entire time in Oregon. So I think it's important to name that these are folks who have been paying taxes for 20 years. They've raised their children here. They may have businesses. They've been investing here, but they don't qualify for any of the benefits that come with when you pay your taxes. So it's a community that has given a lot to us and does not receive a lot in return. Asylum seekers are this third category up here. So something they share in common with refugees is that they have a credible fear that they are fleeing. They're leaving unlivable circumstances that they cannot escape. Something they have in common with the undocumented community is that they have no access to a work permit when they arrive or benefits. There are no benefits they qualify when they arrive unless it's something like cover all kids if you have a child under 25 or 18, then that child can receive health care. There's a real fear of deportation, and there's an institutionalized sense that you are not able to feel safe at any given moment. Someone could come knocking at your door. There's no system of support, also like I mean, and it's hard to get into housing because if you don't have a credit history, if you don't have a way to have a background check done, if you don't have a way to work, and the documents that you cross the border with are literally photocopies that they give you at the border. So there's nothing that looks official. Nobody wants to rent to someone who they don't know anything about. So they have this in common with the undocumented community. They're fleeing and they're expected to apply when they arrive to the US. So when they walk into this country, they're walking in and saying, I need to leave where I was. I haven't done all this background work. And therefore the US government says, sure, come in if you have a sponsor who's going to take care of your financial needs. And also if you're going to be willing to go through this really arduous process of court check-ins and ISAP check-ins if you've been given them to monitor. There's no system of support or tracking, which I mentioned. That's why it's so hard to find the data. If you go looking for how many asylum seekers are in Oregon, you're not going to be able to find that data because it isn't tracked. So when you arrive, you are required to apply for asylum within a year. And this is a complicated legal document. It is not a legal document that you or I could fill out easily. Even folks in other legal professions don't feel comfortable filling out the document because they use this as a way to deter people and screen people and keep people out. So you have 1 year from your arrival date to apply. That whole year. Oftentimes folks don't know where to apply and they may have arrived, stayed with a family member, and then the family member says, you need to get a job. But that unfortunately will hurt their legal case. They're told by lawyers that they're not allowed to work until they have a work permit. And so this really traps someone, right? Because they have this unique, I call it the catch-22 of asylum seekers, is that they're being told that they can't work until they have a work permit. But they're not given a path to get a work permit for a very long period of time. So these people who are super resilient and remove themselves from a really harmful situation get here and are told to depend on other people for essentially 18 months. So once you apply for asylum, then 6 months later, 180 days, you can apply for a work permit. And that, is a real, anyone's guess if you're actually going to get that work permit. And again, is an application that you need a lawyer to help you fill out. Cases in the court take years. The fastest I've seen here in Oregon has been about 15 months for an actual case to be decided. Other folks who have been in Oregon for 5 years and still haven't had their final hearing. So being told not to work is really the crux of what makes it so hard to be an asylum seeker, because you can't work and you have all these check-ins happening with the government where they're asking, are you working? Are you following all the rules that we're asking of you? And if you admit to working, and that can hurt your legal case. So it's a real trap. And I would argue that's why this population is one of the most vulnerable populations, because they're both undocumented and trying to get status. So just some other statistics that I thought were interesting. There's 21.3 million refugees worldwide, 110,000 undocumented folks here in Oregon, and the roughly 6,000 asylum seekers who are here. I will also say that began in 2019, that was the data, and then the pandemic happened and all the courts screeched to a halt. Most people were not being allowed back in, but that brings us to today, where asylum seekers are coming in at the border, and IMIrJ connected with a few different folks, probably, I want to say it was like August. Alida started getting phone calls from national partners saying, hey, we have some folks arriving from Venezuela who are at our shelter in Chicago or DC or New York, wherever they've been bused to from the border. And we know that they're coming to Portland because they have a court date here. Do you have any idea who could support them? And of course, there's congregations who have supported asylum seekers in Portland in the past. And something that IMIrJ has noticed is that we don't have any kind of organizational capacity to support a large number of congregations doing this work. So a church will receive a family and do the best they can by that family, and often get burnt out because you're dealing with someone who's impacted by trauma at home, a traumatic immigration process, arriving to a totally new culture, and trying to survive. So we found that about 4 months in, a lot of congregations just get very, very tired and are like, we need this person to find a new place to be, which makes it really traumatic again for the person who's being impacted. So we've been really thoughtful about that historically. All these communities want roots. They all want to put down roots in their new home. They all want to move forward, and they're all facing, the not in my backyardisms, the like racism and xenophobia that comes with being an immigrant in our community. But I do think that asylum seekers really do inhabit this challenging space in a different kind of way, because they have like this promise of a golden ticket if they just follow all these impossible rules. One thing I want to name about the folks who've arrived recently is that because there's been such an influx of folks who've arrived since this summer with Title 42 lifting, and with some folks arriving from Venezuela, some folks arriving from Haiti, some people arriving from Cuba. There's also been the humanitarian parolees from Ukraine and Afghanistan. So there's some folks arriving, and that's going to be increasing the 6,000 number because there's 3 judges who do immigration in Portland, and the process is slow. So likely 6,000 is an underrepresentation. So now, learning these things we've learned, I'm actually going to push us into this space called one-to-one. So because I am in this organizing space, I think this is a really important practice, because you've heard a little bit about like who's arriving right now. You've heard that asylum seekers are coming from Venezuela. You've heard about the folks who we knew in 2019, and those were largely Central American countries that people were arriving from. So there's been a population shift based on the politics of the border. But you all get this opportunity now to have a conversation with one another. For mutual, it's kind of a mutual conversation. So each person is going to get, I want to say about 3 minutes to answer these questions. It's not a lot of time. So the questions I'm going to have you think about right now while I'm talking are, when was the time that you sought home or safety that you didn't know you'd get? How did people respond in ways that were helpful and weren't helpful? So in this conversation, you're just going to turn to the person, actually try not to partner with someone right next to you. Try to partner with someone who maybe you haven't spoken with before. And this is like a conversation, we're not going to pry, but we're just going to share what we're comfortable sharing for 3 minutes. And then the other person will take a turn and we'll listen really closely to them. And we're going to listen for themes. We're going to get curious. We're going to discover what pressures we have in common, where points that we might find action, like I need to do something, or I need to like an interest in common. But we're going to encounter our own self-interest in this story too, because just as we invited our ancestors to like be in our hearts as we have this conversation, we're talking about people with real stories today too. So I'm going to let each of you partner up with someone maybe across the room or not right next to you, and folks online, maybe if the 4 of you want to have a conversation in the chat, if you want to answer these 2 questions in the chat to each other, that might be, I'm not sure how to do a breakout room with the technology we have today. So go ahead and you all take 6 minutes to just answer these questions and send your chat back to each other. go ahead and find a partner. We'll take 3 minutes. I'll let you know when it's time to switch.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So,
I
know.
Time that we lady first. No, I'm serious.
The only thing that first came to mind.
Okay, so let's.
Fortunate, but
I'm a person.
how do I feel?
I mean, this is generally a first world problem. And very briefly.
But I thought we were something.
Maybe with some undergrad,
She's like, I'm
But I'm still unsteady and living conservatively, and I got to drive. 2 days ago, they let me drive. Yay, that. I frankly underestimated the ordeal. But, you know, it's a hard time to get through to
But it was, I mean, it was.
a period of.
Yeah, like there was uncertainty.
Didn't expect that, so then I had to go talk to the dean, and find another resident. Anyway.
Oh, probably my,
Anyway,
Do I have to change the law?
Oh, did people respond? Well, yeah, people I was living with, I was basically squatty. And they got upset. It wasn't pretty.
What did you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was, I mean. It's kind of scary.
So the dean, oh my gosh, she was great. She was like,
That was kind of choices.
I was kind of,
maybe when I was in my 20s, I was in California. I had fun.
Yeah.
the woman.
You know, I think about quite some time now, like through the last generation. Emancipation back then was way different. When I went away to school, I never came home. I never, maybe for straight. That was it.
It was this way. She would not.
Wouldn't do that. Didn't do it. Let's see, we're helpful. Yeah, I found a friend.
But we're still friends, you know, we're not super close.
It was good.
But
Yeah, it was basic, but my life was, poor anyway, but.
I'm curious.
how, what now?
Well, I'm just curious.
She always quite likes
Recent? Like, who did you try to get help with that then just didn't help, they just kept skipping me, you know?
Well, there were certain criteria, I think, that I met, and some people had disabilities.
I'm similar.
All right, you haven't switched yet. Second partner, your turn to share.
So this doesn't, it doesn't relate to that, but we race here. Grace in Seattle. Okay. Certainly we have an English language background, we have, you know, disability in school, training for IMIrJ, that kind of confidence. I'm thinking back when she said earlier about it, ancestors coming here, that's an ancestor that came from southern Germany. And there's a story.
Yeah, so
that would be really hard.
yeah, so I didn't, you know, I said, well,
I don't know what to say. It's on the federal level. The Democratic administration, Republican administration.
so yeah, I stuck with it.
Right. I moved up a couple of years ago from rural Nevada. And I had a place, my situation changed, I came out. And stayed with my sister, I guess that was, and they had space for me, that was great. So I was just kind of first chance. And so.
No, my generation is, and I mean, anyway, I don't know what's this better one else.
I know, and so we ended up with a rental and hotels and Airbnb, anything we could like, it was very insecure. And I, that was not places, not.
You know, it's off topic, but I've said a few things.
And so what happens with what?
I know my father's actually. He was an immigrant. His ancestry was immigrant in Massachusetts 10 years after the landing at Plymouth. And I was thinking, yeah, immigrants, but it was
Ready to come back? I know, see,
way
this is the
different then.
beautiful thing about one.
It's all the native, nobody knew if they were going to survive the winter.
Alright,
Roaming around.
I love it, there's still more conversation to be had.
I mean, we don't.
So I guess I'm wondering, what was powerful about that opportunity to have this conversation? What did you hear? And we'll just take like maybe a 30-second to 1 minute like harvest of like what you've heard. So go ahead and popcorn things that you heard, like themes you had in common.
You have to stay with it a long time to get something as far as a place to live or something, and you're told, maybe do things you don't agree with to play the game. And if you don't do that, you're challenged, but you wait longer, but so, yeah, long wait. Yeah.
I don't have a lot to offer. Except I was fired several months ago by my cleaning lady. And I've never been fired. Anyway, she had this story of she wanted to have clients on the side. Anyway, I knew she was undocumented, and I had a few days earlier told her I was a retired attorney. I think that did it. I saw the town that they live in. I never would have hurt her. I never would have, but looking back, she was always super careful about where she parked. Maybe she doesn't have a driver's license. And she's afraid of any going into court. I don't know. But I did see the terror, and she was all real vague about where she was living. And anyway, I'm sorry about that. She's been here for many years. She's got a grown son she raised here that went to, I think, Berkeley School of Music or something. I mean, why not? And at the top levels of the government, I know the last immigration laws, I think, were in the 1980s with some changes. And since then, neither Democrats or Republicans have been able to come up with a more reasonable modernization of the immigration laws on the federal level. Recently, I heard some senator, I forget who it was, a woman saying, let's do it piecemeal. The DACAs, legalize the DACA.
Yes.
What's the deal there?
Yeah, it's pretty
And then maybe these longtime people who've been here living under the, I don't know, in the shadows or something, that have, they're American, they have nowhere else to go. Do it piecemeal if you can't do the overall and agree on it. So that's about where I am.
Thank you for sharing. Would anyone else want to have one last little thing that they heard today, or?
It's generally, I think, for both of us, kind of humbling, I think, because, at least for myself, I'm reminded of my heritage of privilege.
Yeah.
I've never been in want, really. I mean, not really.
Not that kind of want.
Poorer maybe, but no.
Yeah, it's tricky to understand a different story than our own story. That's what I like about this particular question, like how have people helped you in ways that were and weren't helpful? And the reason I name that is because there's some traps I'm trying to avoid today in this conversation. And please tell me if this feels uncomfortable, but I think it's really important for us as people who want to be allies to a community to keep in mind, like our first instinct is gonna be, we wanna show up, we wanna fix it. Like, oh, there's problems. Like we all agree that we want you here and we want you to be safe. But there's a tendency among people who really want to be allies to jump to doing something, right? And I think that that's a really born of like a lot of heart, but also not necessarily listening to the people who are having their experience. If we're trying to save someone, that implies that we think they can't take care of themselves, right? So there's another trap, which is armchair experts. And I think we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, right? Where like we've done all our research and we know this issue really well and we understand the legal policies and we know how to advocate for it. And then like we know it, but then we don't move with it and it just sits in our bodies And that can really like be agitating and leaves people feeling really hopeless, right? And then there's like this charity and direct contact, like needing to have a relationship with the person that in the asylum seeking process, or wanting to provide direct services. And that there are places for that. There's really great organizations that I'd be happy to connect people with them if you really feel called to like do direct services or charity work. And also the point of my role and the point of the role that IMIrJ is holding right now is to help build power among the asylum seekers and among our community and listen to what they're naming as their primary requests. So the three things, if you remember that little graph at the beginning where we talked about housing, where we talked about like ongoing education and building relationships with folks who are already here, and about advocacy for policies. And one thing that you're naming about like these big federal policies that are really hard to move, we are called to like move those things. Work permits, the minute people walk in the door, would be a huge solution for a lot of folks, right? Because then they could immediately work. But because we can't change that necessarily at the state level, we have to think about how do we listen and provide support here based on what we're being told right now. So I'm gonna jump to our last page today. Possible next steps. And I named this as like next steps for you all to take. And then you're welcome to like follow up with me. You're welcome to like ask more questions. You have my email and I put it here too. But just, I want this to be a space where Trinity gets to decide how they want to plug in, but based on what we've been told by the community that they really want to see from allies. So education and sustainability. I'd love your thoughts on this training, like what's missing. I'm trying to really hone this in to both meet like what congregations want and need to know in order to feel activated to move forward, and also funding. IMIrJ definitely would benefit from the funding of ongoing support from congregations or individuals. And that keeps this kind of work, these kinds of trainings, the organizing within the community, the workshops that we're doing with the asylum seekers themselves, and the conversations that we're having with state and local partners around housing happening, keeps our lights on. Advocacy work. So this one right here is a little bit tricky simply because we're at the very beginning of the legislative cycle. So bills are being brought to the floor right now, and there's some bills that we've been asked by the immigrant community to make sure that we're prioritizing, asking allies who can vote to call their legislators about. So I would recommend that as we get more information, keep yourself updated by following IMIrJ and subscribing to their online communications, whether that be via Facebook or Instagram or email. And also just, Steve and I can stay in contact, and Allison too, about next steps. But bills that we know that we are following for sure and that we want to see movement on involve stable homes. So there's a lot of housing related bills, and we want to make sure that those bills include asylum seekers and their stability. Indigenous language justice. Now, a lot of the folks that I named that are arriving right now from Cuba, from Haiti, and from Venezuela speak either Creole or Spanish. However, there's a really large part of the undocumented community and immigrant asylum seeker community that speak indigenous languages. So those 6,000 that I centered in 2019, the majority of those folks came from countries like Guatemala and southern Mexico, where they still speak a different language than Spanish. And there are not enough interpreters. And there's even within one specific dialect, like there might be Mixteco or Quiche, and there's Mixteco Alto and Mixteco Bajo. There's different languages within a language. So without enough interpretation, people can't get justice in their court hearings because details that really could be very important and central to their asylum case may not come up. We're being asked by the community to center the Food for All bill, which would provide SNAP benefits for all Oregonians, regardless of immigration status. And that would be a really critical next step for asylum seekers to feel stable. When we asked them in 2020, as we were working on that grant, what their priorities were, it was housing, like having housing stability, it was help with their bills, because there aren't enough funds for people to keep the lights on if they're not working, if they can't work, and food. Those were the top three priorities. Welcome center. So there's a legislative concept that just made it to the floor around making welcome centers for refugees and immigrants. And as we have a better sense of how that bill progresses, we're going to want people to contact their legislators about it. And again, I say make it a party. Like, what if Trinity had all of you come in and you all had scripts and you all called your legislators together? And when they came in on Monday morning, they had 25 phone calls, like, their voicemail box is full because you all spoke up and said what you thought was important. housing. So the options for those first 18 months where someone's without a work permit are a priority. The community's priority, again, is roots and togetherness. So they would love to see affordable housing, which is with a priority to their community so that they can stay close to each other, whether that's like a trailer park or an apartment complex or duplexes or houses near each other where they can rent and be in community with one another. They want to be close to each other and build community here. Pods on church property is a concept that's come up. That was not high on the list of the options when we asked the folks who were living at the shelter. They said their preference would be something a little bit more stable where they could cook and clean and, you know, make an actual home, but also there may be the need in the near future for that exact thing. And I think that being as a congregation in conversation about, oh, maybe our congregation doesn't have space for a pod, but maybe we know relationships with like the property manager or owner of an apartment complex who'd be willing to like enter into an agreement with us. So a concept we're kind of considering is like, what does it look like to have congregational co-signing models where, let's say, someone in your congregation owns an apartment and is willing to rent 4 units out of the 100 or something like that to asylum seekers. And then Trinity comes alongside and pays first and last month so that folks can get into the stable housing and then if they are going to work, do the work they need to do. But when you have a co-signing model, what is really beautiful about that is that people are more willing to rent to people they wouldn't rent to normally. Also builds a relationship between you and the community. And the last suggestion I have is our accompaniment program. Well, accompaniment. So our accompaniment program does have a march training. If you all are interested in doing that, it requires availability during business hours, and frequently it's to the immigration court in downtown. And then there's a mass assembly on February 26th at First Unitarian from 4 to 6, and this is actually being led by our partners at the Land and Housing Coalition. But what they're lifting up in this assembly is for an opportunity for people who care about houselessness for the folks on the street here, houselessness for folks who are experiencing mental health crises, immigration crises, all, you know, youth having a hard time with like finding the resources that they need and lifting up like all of us care about this. Let's come together and see that with one another, if we all lift our voices together, we can build power. So that's an opportunity. You are most welcome to come. We would love to see you there, and it's not too far from you. That's all I've got for you. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Trinity is still in the process of discerning what our next steps are going to be. If you have thoughts about this, please talk to Allison. She's kind of heading our team. And we do, please, we do want to support you in the advocacy work especially. So, you know, keep us in the loop and we would like to support it in any way we can.
Absolutely, I will. Thank you all so much. And again, because I would love to have an evaluation, but I also know you're all headed to church. If you want to email at alyssa@IMIrJ.org, like any thoughts, anything that you felt like was really missing or you think needs to be extra highlighted, I would love that feedback. So, thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Do you have a handout by any chance?
I don't, and I kind of decided against a handout simply because I wanted us to have conversations. So